let's go ahead and get started. Joe, would you open for us?
Sure. Most gracious, Almighty Heavenly Father, we come before you at this time to thank you for your grace, mercy, and love, and for all you've done for us. We pray that you would please abide with us and help us to be strengthened by your word and help us to understand and to remember the different historical events that the book of Revelations uncovers for us from John. We thank you for your grace and mercy towards us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, we didn't quite finish the first woe trumpet, which is the fifth trumpet. So we'll have just a review here, and then we'll get back on track to where we left off. I didn't have but about 5 slides left, but we just ran out of time. And hopefully, if we're lucky, we'll get through the sixth trumpet. All right. So as I mentioned in the opening, for if anybody didn't quite remember, that these trumpets are interesting because, like I said, with the barbarian trumpets, we're not really connected to the barbarian era. We don't have any history with it. We don't understand how they thought or anything. But this next section, of course, is about the rise of Islam. And of course, immediately we are in connection with that more than ever, even in the last 5 years since I last put this together. It's everywhere. This is the fifth trumpet. The fifth and sixth will have to do with the rise of Islam and the power that it had in its heyday. Of course, we immediately are connected to it, and it's the predominant thing in the world today in a way it never was when most of us were very young. Our kids, it's been with them all the time, but it was we always saw it on the other side of the world before. But anyway, of course, the rise of Islam started with, as we talked about, Muhammad, who didn't live a really long life. He died at 62 or 63. He actually never was part of the move into Rome, but he's the one that put this religion together and organized it and got a great following. And by the time the Muslims do enter Rome, the whole Arabian Peninsula is pretty much converted to it. He's become almost like a god to him. So supposedly, you're not even supposed to look at a picture of him. He's so honored. It's something that could get you in a lot of trouble over in these countries. And it talked about how he had the key to the bottomless pit or abyss, and it compared it to a fallen star that had this key to release what was ever in the abyss. And we talked about the fallen star being that he fell because he had to run and flee, and his some of his followers actually went to a city called Abyssia, which was quite interesting. But we were talking about what was the abyss, and that we were looking for a hole in the, not a hole in the ground, but an actual place of military movements. And we looked at how that they came in through the Jordan Valley and up that way, which happens to be right where the lowest point on earth is. So there's some things there that are intriguing to consider since the word abyss is being used. And it compared it also, it brought 2 new creatures into the mix, the locust, and why the symbol of the locust, being such a small creature that it is, but in masses, it dwarfs anything. And that is the comparison it uses. And that even that in their folklore that Muhammad said locusts fell into his lap and said, "We are the army of God." So, and that's in their folklore, which I think is just something that God has given us.
We never see a locust by itself. You only see them all together.
Yeah.
It's a huge mass.
I know. You could squash them in your hand, but when they're coming at you like this, you can't stop them. It's just an amazing contrast there. But anyway, let's see. But as we talked about, Muhammad died and his father-in-law, Abu Bakr, took over, and he became the first caliph following the death of Muhammad. And that caliph is a word that became very prevalent here in the last 5 years when ISIS was on the rise. They were trying to start this up again. It was a word that kind of been forgotten. But in 632 is when he started this movement, and was what was called, like, it's the same as a head of state or king, as we talked about. And we saw the map. This is the actual map. This is not a religious map made by Christadelphians or anything. This is an actual map showing that they came right up through the Dead Sea. It couldn't have been in any lower part of the earth, or it was right here. And we talked about this date here, that it was 100 years after the fourth trumpet. So a lot of time has passed. A lot of changes have been taking place in the world, and which we're seeing the start of the development of those things through technology. Real quickly, there was a symbol of the scorpion that was brought in, and the scorpions and the locusts are bound together in this. They play a part together in the way that they're talked about. And it appears that the scorpion is referring to perhaps the Saracen fire, which is what the Muslims are called. Remember, Muslim is a religion. It is not a nationality. But they were called Saracens at that time. And history records that the Saracens launched these fire type things, like I would call them fireworks, is the best you could tell. Then they called them they literally called them scorpions. And they ignited with nitrite powder, as we read through this. But this last line was very important, because it says that it reduced all things to ashes. And it says that when these locusts came up out of the pit, they came as the smoke of a great furnace. So we can see possibly another connection there, that we're looking in the right place. And then we also talked about the hordes of Saracen locusts, which were the Muslim locusts that came up, and all of the attributes of this creature. And someone tried to draw all of this, which I thought was very good that we have this. I don't know how old this is or who it came from, but it was pretty good representation of how they would come as an army with these attributes of locusts and scorpions, which we get into. And Muhammad's army was principally composed of cavalry, and the scriptures talked about these locusts sounding like the wheels of chariots charging forth. So, and we can imagine the noise that it would make, like this fellow standing in a swarm of them. I'm sure it was fairly noisy, the flapping of their wings. But this is about where we were slowing down last week. It said they were to torment and hurt. Didn't say to kill, but to torment and hurt. Now, thousands of people died, but this has to do with the death of Rome. Rome was tormented and hurt very badly in this. In Revelation 9:5, it says, and to them it was given that they should not kill them. That's the Romans, really. But they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when he strikes a man. Now, scorpions can be deadly, but they can also not necessarily kill you. But my understanding is that the wound of a scorpion is extremely painful, from what I've heard. And also in verse 10, we got verses 9 and 10 talking about the situation. And it says that they, the locusts, had tails like unto scorpions. So there we see the two insects, or the concept of the insects, being bound together. And there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men for 5 months. Now, what we're going to look at here is about this 5 months. Notice it was mentioned twice. And it says in 9:6, and in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And history is recorded. I got this off of Wikipedia, I believe. It's been a while. But it said, for the sake of peace, many wanted to accept the Saracen yoke and cease as an independent country. This is where they seek death and desire to die. Many were willing to die as a country if it meant their lives. That's how bad things had gotten.
Well, what was it that was causing the pain?
With So the Saracen fire, the technology that the Romans couldn't fight against was extreme, and the way they came through there. And if you remember, they were targeting the Romans and not necessarily the regular general
So
public.
was it 5 months of war? With the
Well, I'm
Saracen
gonna show you. We're gonna get to that here. That's where we're gonna pick up tonight. But they had, the Saracens had gained a technological advantage militarily. As Rome was shrinking, of course, they couldn't develop new weaponry or things of that nature. It was all they could do just to hold the line, but it was slowly sinking back. And what this is suggesting is that they would seek death, is that they would accept political death, not necessarily. It's not the death of about the nation. It's that they would politically just be rather be absorbed into the Saracens than to continue with what was happening. So this is about where we left off. I showed you this map last week, and this is a map of the height of this first Muslim movement. They literally came all the way across northern Africa up into Spain. And as you can see, the green part there, the Byzantine Empire, was the size of the Roman army at the peak of this first wave of Muslims. Now, what I'm going to show you is an explanation that I found, I believe, from Eureka, but it's for your consideration. I haven't heard anything else on it, so it's just for your consideration, but it seems to line up. The 5 months is mentioned twice, as we looked at in verse 5 and 10. This is very interesting. This is just natural things. Locusts only appear 5 months out of the year, from what I found from science. This is not something in the Bible. This is what science says. Now, looking at this 5 months, the brethren used the day for a year formula, as we talked about, with the Jewish calendar now. Keep in mind that. So, if you're using that formula, 5 months would equal 150 days for 150 years as a day for a year. 150 years times 2 is 300 years, and the 5 months is mentioned twice. We don't see something like this mentioned twice too much, especially in Revelation. So that's what the brethren were drawing on. But it's very intriguing to consider when you look at the dates put together. So going to our next slide here to explain this. Now here's the historical facts to line up with this. It said in 634 AD, the Saracen locust came out of the abyss, or out of the Arabian Peninsula, so to speak. In 933 AD, which is 299 years later, the Caliph that started to be built under Muhammad was stripped of his head of state of powers due to internal factions. They were having their own internal problems. The authority of the caliphs were heavily restrained to ceremonial and religious matters. In other words, they were no longer the big man on campus anymore. So things were changing within the Muslim world of that day under, of course, many rulers over 300 years. This isn't still Muhammad's father-in-law doing all this. He's already died probably 200 years earlier. So keep that in mind. What they started to come apart as an entity, the entity that they were. The system of governing the Saracens was changing, just like things do, like every 300 years. You think about that, that's still longer than this country's been a nation. So they were around really a long time. When we think about the 250 years or whatever this country's been a nation, seems like a long time ago, but this was at least 50 years longer. So anyway, moving on, there's more here. So the fifth woe trumpet had a 300-year impact on the Catholic apostasy. I find this intriguing. Everything I'm showing you here, it was 150 years in its rise to power, and it was 150 years in its decline. And you can see like the 5 months there twice is what the brethren were suggesting. And I say again, it's suggesting that I would not make it a practical issue, but we gotta look and see what happened in that time fits. And I'm going to show you something when we get into the next trumpet here shortly. Some very fascinating things that would have brought us up to another moment that's hard to argue with about these dates. This appears to meet the requirements of prophecy. This 150 years or 5 months, and 150 years or 5 months of decline, that they were like in charge or had this control until they fell apart, just like Rome fell apart over like 1500 years. And I find this intriguing because this is a great puzzle of history that we are trying to understand. And it may look very obscure to many people, but it's the best I've heard at this point. If anybody ever heard anything different, I'd love to hear it. I think, but it seems to fit. It just seems to fit. So if we move forward now, in Revelation 9:11, it says, "And they had a king over them, which is the angel, which means messenger, of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue, his name is Apollyon," which that word means destroyed. And the caliphs were only in power during the fifth trumpet period. That's very interesting because this power came up, ran its mayhem for over almost 300 years, and then it collapsed again. And we can understand this caliph thing, power thing before by seeing just the way ISIS got here in the last few years. They've been put down. I don't know what their situation is now. If anybody knows anything about if they're even still out there or they've joined other parties. But they were heading towards doing some very, very bad things if they had gotten power. People were very afraid of them because of their way they were abusive to women, all the rules, and all the women were walking around totally covered, had to wear, it was all kinds of burdens that they placed upon people or you were executed. So it's only now in the 21st century we're hearing about them again, and maybe they'll rise up again yet. We were kind of wondering there when I first gave this, but it sort of subsided. Has anybody heard what's happened to ISIS? Do we hear any more about them, or they disbanded?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're still out there. As soon as
They've been basically quarantined by the nation, so they're in retreat. But
so as United States is now leaving Afghanistan, those powers begin to rise again.
They could come back. They don't have that check on them.
Yeah, there's no possibly. They are in the process of rising right now.
Right.
so 2 days ago, they claimed responsibility for an Iraqi suicide attack that left dozens dead. So they're still
out there, but they're not the driving force that they were. They were the big headline in the news all the time before, about 3 years ago. Okay. Good. All right. So that kind of brings us to the end, because it says the very next verse in 9:12, "One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter." So that's pretty much what the fifth woe trumpet, or the first woe trumpet, or the fifth trumpet is. It's the rise of the Muslim world, but the Muslim world doesn't go away. It just changes, sort of like leadership and who's in charge and the pattern in which they follow. And that's what we're gonna get in here tonight. And keep in mind, 300 years of learning how to launch all this fire on people, they get better and better at it. And by the time we get to the end of this woe, we're going to see quite a change in what's become of all that. So with the sixth trumpet, is where we're going to read tonight. And let's see, I'll ask Brother David, would you read Revelations 9:13 through 21? And I'll open the curtain on this one while we listen to David.
Revelation 9:13. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and of census and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of the lion, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire, and by the smoke, and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth, and in their tails, for their tails were likened to serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt.
All right, thank you, David. Okay, so we got some new things to look at here. Now we have horses' heads like lions' heads, with fire coming out of their mouths and power in their tails. Of course, we saw that with the scorpion locust, and it's very similar. It's just going to be on a bigger scale, and we're just going to see some real changes. And notice this time they say they kill a third part. It's not just hurt, but they kill. So something dies here, and this one that did not die in the fifth trumpet. And I think that's significant because of what happens now. So let's start. Let's look into this and look at some of the components here. It says, and the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God. So we have a voice coming out. So
is that the altar of incense, or is that where they offer the sacrifice?
This would be the altar, I believe, that is in this opening scene. Here, this is reminding us that we have not left that opening scene, because this is mentioned several times, and the angels are interacting and voices coming from it. It'll reveal itself here.
No, I'm just asking if it's the one outside of the temple that they sacrifice the animals.
Oh,
that's what I meant.
no,
Yes or no?
I think it's a representation of this, that the altar is Christ, and the lives that are hidden.
So it is the one outside.
I think it's a big one with the four horns.
Probably. Oh, yeah, if you're thinking about that. Okay. All right. We know that the altar is Christ because we're told so in Scripture. And Hebrews 13:10 says we have an altar, and it's referring to Christ, whereof they have no right to eat, which serve in the tabernacle. And if you read through Hebrews in that 13th chapter, which our Sunday school is in right now, it's all about that. But the focus is on the four horns of the altar. That is the attribute of this, that the voice is coming from. So we have to, what are the four horns of the altar representing here? And whose voice was it that he was hearing? All right, so this is what I'll suggest to you, and it seems to fit very well. We've looked at the four before. Remember the four camps around Israel. It was the whole entire camp of Israel that were stationed on the four corners around the temple. And we also had the four living creatures that were full of eyes and wings. And each one of these represented the full multitude of, at the time of Israel, those were the ones following God. And by the time we get to our closing image, it's the multitude of Gentiles and Jews who are enlightened because of all the eyes and the wings with the sound of rushing water. So we see this referring to what I would believe to be a multitude. And it takes us back to the altar in the fifth seal, where in Revelation 6:9 it says, when he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. We can see from the fifth seal that this should now be familiar to us. We've talked about it before and what was under that altar. You can see why we need these symbols come up again and again, and it's important to understand them so we can see how they fit in as they are brought up again or interacting again in this opening scene. The altar now is, let's say, activated with these voices as he watches these things happen, and with the trumpets, this altar once again responds to the trumpet. That's what I'm seeing. It says, and then in Revelation 8:3, it says, and another angel came and stood at the altar, having the golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. So this altar is in that throne room, and it is responding to these different things. And what was it? It was about the prayers of the saints. Just like the blood of Abel was crying out, the blood of the saints of the ages who have suffered under the hand of this are crying out and asking for things to move forward. So what I'm understanding here from my point of view is this is the voice of the one voice of the prayers of the saints. And now they're speaking out. And we see that it's just like the ones that spoke out under the altar said, how long, O Lord? Well, I would suggest to you the same voices are now speaking here. It is saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpets, the voices are saying, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. In other words, move. They're asking this thing to move forward. We now have four angels that are bound in the great river Euphrates. So the Euphrates now becomes their geographical focal point. So I would suggest to you that this is telling us where to look for the next movement of things taking place. It becomes obvious where we're dealing with in the world if we know our maps. So let's look at the map. And here's the river Euphrates, and it runs directly through the center of this Muslim territory. And it's a very long river. I don't know how many miles that is across Iraq and Syria.
It's about 3,000.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I thought it was at least 2. It's a long, long river. And these angels are standing there ready to release something, and the voices under the altar are asking them to release the four angels. So let's look at another map here.
Can I say something real quick?
What's that? Go ahead.
The Euphrates right now is it's very comical because everybody's trying, we can go back one slide for just a second. Every country is trying to prevent the next country from getting any water. So Turkey has put every dam they can on those 2 rivers to the north, the Marat and can't see the other one, Karasu, to prevent it from getting to Syria. Syria has dammed up everything they can to prevent it from getting to Iraq, and Iraq has done everything they can to prevent anybody from downstream getting it either. But the Tigris and the Euphrates come together, their confluence is in Iraq. So, and the waters are now so trickle down, you can't even bring a boat into it anymore in most places, even further downstream, because they're sucking all the water out of it for irrigation for their crops. So the next country will get it. So Turkey, Syria, and Iraq have almost drained it dry. It's sort of like the Colorado River in Virginia, Colorado River that goes through Colorado. There's nothing but lawyers doing water rights and dams. It never reaches the Pacific, ever. all that water is diverted to California, Nevada, New Mexico, and Arizona. Same thing here. They're all diverting the water away, so it's losing its power, which is prophetically fulfilled.
Right, it's drying up still. Right, it hasn't stopped drying up. If that's true, that's new. I hadn't heard that before. So that's in these modern times. Well, anyway, let's look at our map here. About this is now the rise of the Ottoman Empire, which Joe, you were asking about last week. And the rise of the Ottoman Empire was a four-part step that we're going to see. Notice that the Euphrates, as we talked about, the Euphrates is right here on this map. I know it's hard to see, but there's the Euphrates River that we just looked at on the other one. And right here is present-day Istanbul. Istanbul. I knew I was close by one letter. I knew one letter was off. But at the time we're at, this is present-day Constantinople, which was the capital of political Rome. This was the last holdout. So we're going to be looking at how this unfolds. Now, this is all still Muslim. It never changes. It's still Muslim today. But we're going to look at some brief history of how this all comes together in this next trumpet. In Revelation 16, we jumped a little bit ahead here to just think about what we're looking at. It says, the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof dried up, that it may make way for the kings of the east might be prepared. So what this is saying is, by the reason I'm jumping ahead, there's something else coming down the road after this empire dries up. So the thing goes on and on. So imagine that if the Ottoman Empire were a river, just imagine all of these colors, the countries was water that had overflown the Euphrates River. And if the Euphrates dried up, we could see how it would just all run right back into the Euphrates and dry up in the Persian Gulf.
And it did during 1917.
Yeah.
That's when, see, the guy who was Lawrence of Arabia was like, he's renowned, legendary. What was he back then? He was a cartographer. He was making maps of the desert. But he was a linguist, and he could speak all these different languages, and that's what helped him unite all the Arabs. And the British promised him, when the war's over, all of this will be yours. And they didn't get any of it. When it was all said and done, the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916 fell into place, and France took half and British took half. And that was when it was all over. And that's when that was prepared the whole land of the East for the Jews to return.
Well, that'll be sort of part of about the kings of the East when we get there. That's down the road a ways. I just wanted to jump ahead because that drying up, we could see how, just looking at the map, we could see how if that was all water, it would just drain back in the Euphrates and disappear because of the location of the Euphrates. And these are some of the beautiful things that the Lord has left us to find. So let's come back to where we were. It says, and the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, a day, a month, and a year, for to slay a third part of men. So here we have that third part of men again, another third part, and they're going to die. So something's going to, life is going to end here. And remember, we had four angels holding back the winds at one time. Now we have four angels about to be loosed. Now these angels aren't the angels in heaven so much as it's what it's going to be is armies on the move, because they're messengers. They don't know they're messengers. They have no knowledge of it, but they are. The four angels were four armies called to duty or messengers from God. The four angel powers did not come simultaneously, but one after the other over nearly 400 years. And this is all in history, and it fits so well why we have four angels, and what we're going to find out before the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which comes down the road, there were four armies. And it was, I don't know any about the first three, the Seljukians, it was the Mongols, the Tartars, and the Ottomans finally came later. this is how the Ottoman Empire rises through all of this. Once again, though, history records 4 armies, and we have 4 angels ready to be loosed. It's just, it appears to fit. It's just so many of these things. So, and the third part of men is the Eastern Roman Empire.
Can you go back on this right away?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to get the link.
Okay.
And you make an important point that when you're trying to teach people about this, get them to immediately take angels out of their minds,
Yeah.
and replace it with messengers and have them consistently think that way.
Mhm.
And it's a whole lot better because otherwise they get real confused.
Yeah. Why? Yeah.
They're looking for this, big sworded guy in white coming,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen.
No, they're messengers. They're bringing God's message of judgment
Right.
upon them. They don't. They're just like the 4 horses of the apocalypse. None of those people knew they were being
So
driven.
you're going to go into each of those.
No, no, just we're going to get to the Ottomans in the end. There's too much history there. I didn't go quite that deep. Remember, I'm a stone skipping across the lake. So the third part of men is the Eastern Roman Empire, which is the last third standing, so to speak. All right, let's look at this form. We got another formula. See, we're getting used to these things now, I hope. It says we have an hour, a day, a month, and a year, and to figure this out. So, based on the day for year principle, using the Jewish calendar, which is 360 days in a year, we have an hour would equal 1 month, a day would equal 1 year, a month would equal 30 years, and a year would equal 360 years. You add all that up,
401 years in a month.
391 years in 1 month. So this gives us a time period that all of this would take place. And it appears to be literally right down to the month. And I'm going to show you that if you don't remember it from watching it before. And this is another clue we're seeing that tells us we're looking in the right place, and that the things that happened in the 5th trumpet had to be reasonably accurate for this to be accurate and now play out in its time period that God had given it. So let's go forward here. Here's the historical facts, okay? The fall of the Eastern Roman Empire was on May 29th, 1453 AD. 391 years, you go back 391 years and 1 month, it's April 29th, 1062 AD. Now, there's a date that means nothing to anybody, really, when you think about it. What happened that day? Was this somebody's birthday? What? All right, well, here's the thing. Here's what happened. April 27th, 1062 AD, Togrul Bey, he became the first military leader of the Turks and became the head of the Islamic faith. And here he is. He must be an important guy if they still have a statue in this good shape of him. He must have been pretty important to the Muslim world today. On the 27th of April, 1062, the powerful Turkish leader, Togrul Bey, established himself in Muslim authority by marrying the Caliph's daughter. We know Caliph was, but sort of a gesture of good faith. He waged war on the Eastern Roman Empire, initiating a series of determined assaults against Constantinople. All right, he set this movement in motion, and it continued long after his life. At last, on May 28th, May 1453, the city fell to who was in charge then, Muhammad II. And it was 391 years and 1 month to that day. It's pretty accurate stuff here. It fits to the month. You can go back and look up the history books. It's all written down. This didn't come out of the Bible, but these formulas did. And I'm very thankful for the past brethren who have put in the work, even if it's not 100% accurate to some degree. We don't know if we got it all right. It sure lines up very well, enough to be extremely intriguing. Okay, but I'm going to show you something more about this Muhammad II of his victory is extremely critical to what Scripture talks about. Now, in the 16th chapter of that we read tonight, it said the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them. Well, that is a number that there isn't an army in the world that has that many people living at the same time.
But if they're locusts, it works out.
At 200,000, what does that look like? I mean, we don't use phraseology like that, but it comes to 200 million. 200 million man army is an enormous amount of people. For anybody to sustain an army that had 200 million people is impossible. But, and this is what the number looks like. I just thought it's intriguing to see the number itself. It's kind of getting into Google stuff there. But it's suggested that this is the total number of the army over 391 years, that it could have been with all that many people. What is this number? This is the best thing I've heard. I'm open to something else, but there could have been as many as 200 million people. I don't know, or maybe it's a symbolic number for something else. But this is what brethren have come up with. Again, it's you can't say for sure, but what could it mean? I don't know. If it's something
I'm
else,
sure the Bureau of Veteran Affairs, the Ottomans, could tell you exactly how many are on payroll.
well, I doubt if they could pay for those.
I know.
All right, but that's just, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but it's intriguing to consider what that number meant, because it said the army was 200 million. So of these four armies over 300, almost 400 years, perhaps it could have equaled 200 million, or perhaps it's just the astronomical number that the Lord has given us, like thousands and 10,000s and thousands of thousands. It could be that number. It could be that kind of thing. That's the only other alternative to it, but I just throw that out there. Do with it as you please. Anyway, okay. Now, were you going to say something? Let's get into this imagery, which was extremely intriguing, and this has always been one of my favorite parts of the class. I just love this stuff. This is what one artist. This was the best picture I could find to represent what John might have seen. When you try to put all these things together, it kind of gives you a real crazy picture. But let's go back in verse 17, and he said, "And I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them having breastplates of fire, of jacinths and of brimstone. And the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouth issued fire and smoke and brimstone." So if you draw it literally, you have a horse with a lion's head with fire and smoke coming out of his mouth, which of course isn't anything real. And if you take Revelations totally literal, then you're waiting for something to happen that is just not going to actually happen. You can't justify this being something real. Okay, so let's kind of look into this. What could this be? All right. It says, by these three was the third part of men killed. Here's where people die. By the fire, by the smoke, and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouth. And here we go. Here's another clue. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails. That's kind of weird. For their tails were like unto serpents, and they had heads, and with them they do hurt. So we have this thing where they got things coming out of their mouth and their tail. Remember, with the fifth trumpet, they were only to hurt. In other words, the Roman Empire didn't die, like I talked about. This time they were killed. So we are now 400 years further in time when they were first learning how to launch the seraphim fire. The power in their mouth and in their tails may be a little hard to picture, but what could it possibly be talking about? And for those who've seen it, we remember that it appears to be, and up to your consideration, the development of the cannon. And I'm going to show you why it works, or at least why it can fit. Because when the cannon is pulled, the barrel is facing backwards. We've always seen this, that when a cannon, now this is a Civil War cannon, I realize, but it's something that we can relate to. But the pictures I'm going to show you, this was the way it's been done from the very beginning. So the power is in their tails. It's facing out the other way. But when the cannon is turned around, the power is in their mouths. And what does it issue out? It issues out fire, smoke, and brimstone, which, although this shot a lead ball, as we know, they didn't have lead balls back then. They had something else. And this is the very exact thing, and may have been actually present at the fall of Constantinople. This is the first real functional in the field cannon that had been developed in that day. And it's amazing that this has been preserved. It said they were called bombards back then. We've heard of bombarding somebody. It means shooting a cannon in the old style. It says supersized bombards had been employed in Western Europe siege warfare since the beginning of the 15th century and were introduced to the Ottoman army in 1453 and used on the occasion of the siege of Constantinople. The cannon, this cannon would have made quite a noise that had been new to them to hear. They weren't used to hearing cannon fire. We know what cannon fire is, we hear it all the time. But imagine having this thing. I would hate to stand near this thing when they lit it. You got something?
Yeah, that's what it looks like when it's on its wheels and the balls beside.
Okay, you got an actual picture.
Yeah.
You want to put it in front of the camera?
I'm gonna try to see if it's seeable or not. We'll give it a try.
I haven't seen that
All
one.
right, gang, we're gonna try to give you a picture of this thing. How's that?
Y'all see that?
See the big giant balls on the left side? The sides of that thing with the people standing by? Humongous.
Thank you, Walter.
Mhm.
That's one I had not seen. Maybe that just came out since I put this together.
If this was the invention of the cannon, it's still being used and tested around the world. But we have shooting barrels.
Yeah.
So,
Well, this goes on. Revelation 9:17 said, "And the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions." I would suggest to you that might be the sound of the roar of the cannon when it fires. I'm just suggesting that because this thing would have made one heck of a noise. Like I said, I would hate to be standing anywhere near it when they fired this thing. I don't even know how they fired it, but they did. And I got a little more on it here. So that would be perhaps considering the roar of the cannon, which was all new to them in that day. The ammunition used by the bronze bombards were stone balls 1 meter in diameter and weighed 880 pounds. The transport of just 2 bombards proved to be a logistical challenging task. They were dragged to the fall of Constantinople by 70 oxen and 1,000 men. It took a while to get them there, but it was a technological edge that they had for these people behind this wall. And this is the one that blows me away. We have this cannon, we have history, what it says. This is an actual painting of Mehmed II approaching Constantinople. Look right here. There's a cannon being pulled backwards. That's the same cannon. It looks very similar to the one I just showed you. You go back. You see that? This was painted a long, long time ago. And yes, they had cannons and they came and they used them on Constantinople and they shot stone balls. And what is brimstone? Burning fire, rock that's coming at you. It's like what comes out of a volcano almost.
Brimstone is really mainly sulfur.
Isn't it? The rock that comes out with it.
The burning sulfur.
Yes.
the hummus was like a high salt content. A lot of times it's salt.
Anyway, here's a smaller version. Walter had a very good picture because it had it on wheels. I had not seen one on wheels yet. But here's a smaller version, and look at that ball. That one probably don't weigh 800 pounds, but imagine loading this thing. But this is what issued out of these cannons' mouths. And we can see how it fits with what John was trying to explain. So we have a stone ball, which with the fire and all, and of course sulfur was one of the combinations. Good point, Walter. It reminded me to get that organized, is that sulfur is one of the components of gunpowder.
Yeah.
So that fits along with that. Now, this is the wall of Constantinople that still stands today, and as you can see, it's pretty battered. Those very cannons, those balls hitting that wall, even though they didn't explode, it's just the constant bombarding would eventually take its toll, especially if they cleared the wall and they come crashing into the city. To imagine getting hit by one of those, it would take a lot out. Now, who was there? And this is very interesting. Constantine the 11th. Interesting that Constantine got the Roman Empire to its height, and Constantine is the one that went out with a bang, so to speak. It said before the beginning of the siege, Muhammad II made an offer to Constantine the 11th. He said, in exchange for the surrender of Constantinople, the emperor's life would be spared and he could continue to rule in mystery, wherever that was. He was going to offer him his life. This is very interesting that this has been recorded. He replied, to surrender the city to you is beyond my authority or anyone else who lives in it. For all of us, after taking the mutual decision, shall die out of free will without sparing our lives. So they fought to the death, and his death marked the end of the Roman Empire, which had continued in the East for 977 years after the fall of the Western Empire. How frightening it must have been to have those cannons shooting at you. You can just see what it's done to the walls. You know, there are remnants left. But now it's kind of odd. Constantinople makes a lovely planter, as you can see. It's a nice place to grow shrubs. That's all that's left of the Roman Empire right there, as it was known. Now, 2 years before Constantinople fell, this is all that was left. And as you can see, the Ottoman Empire on both sides of them. That small one up there at the Black Sea is where Constantinople was, and it looked like they had a little island that they had retreated, were trying to hold. But that was the last hurrah. So now we'll kind of wind this one down. It says in Revelation 9:20, and the rest of the men which were not killed, some survived, by these plagues, yet repented not of their works of their hands, that they should not worship devils, idols of gold and silver and brass and stone, of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. Robert Roberts had some remarks on this in 13 lectures of the Apocalypse. He says, the rest of the men, we are told that they were not killed by these plagues, repented not of their works of their hands. A statement illustrated by the fact that notwithstanding the terrible affliction and the overthrow of Eastern Rome by the Turks as instruments of God's vengeance, he goes on to say, the populations of Western Europe continue addicted to the doctrines, the practices of Mother Church, which God has stamped with his execration, or meaning a thing held an abomination. So at this time, moving forward in history, there's no longer a national Rome, but there is a church Rome, which of course became the Holy Roman Empire, the religious system that survived in the West. And that's going to be a good place to stop. I don't know if it's gone an hour.
Right on time.
Is it? Has it been an hour? I wanted to get through that because it really flows. And I think it's just an interesting part of everything we've been reading and studying here about Constantinople from Constantine's point right down to this last guy named Constantine. That can't be a coincidence. that's happened. It's Constantine from one end to the other, and now it's gone. So that brings us to the end of what I had tonight. Does anybody have anything they want to add?
I was thinking about what you said earlier, and the smoke rising, I think that was the altar, the golden altar that was being referred to, the smaller square one with the two poles that gets moved around. I think that's the real altar that's being referred to there,
It could be.
because it more relates to Christ, the idea of prayers of the saints. We
Right.
talked about the saints being under the altar
Mhm.
and the four corners, once again, the horns of the four powers of mercy and things like that. So I think that may be the smaller one.
It could be. It's the altar that's speaking is the one in that opening scene, whatever altar that was.
Yeah.
It's in that old. So again, John is seeing all these things, and then something in that throne room is activated and taking a part in what John is seeing. That's the beauty of it. Then he goes back to seeing the next thing that happens.
Right, because that altar is associated with incense, which is the prayers of saints.
Prayers.
So that's a voice, if you will,
Right, the
coming
voice.
forward.
That's their voices that are going up.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Good. All right. Anybody have anything to add? Is this microphone on?
Yes, they can hear you.
Okay.
They better be able to. Here comes David.
Thank you, Brother Roger.
You're welcome. It's maybe a quiz next week.
Quiz.
Oh, yeah, yeah, the quiz.
Yeah, you tell them that, there won't be anybody here next week. Don't do that.
Well, that's all I have for tonight. I think it's a good stopping point because we start into something else next week. So that's the 6th of the trumpets. The 7th is yet to sound. So.
All right.
So with that, I'll say good night.
Good night. You're hard work.
Stay
Good night,
safe.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Buenas noches.